Prime Minister, you successfully passed the first part of your legislation, but only after 6 months of mass protests that have left this country so divided, Israel's president has actually warned of the danger of civil war. Was it worth it?
There won't be civil war, I guarantee you that. But I think that correcting the imbalance in Israel's democracy, where the judiciary is basically arrogated to itself nearly all the powers of the executive branch and the legislature, I think, yes, it is important to do it. I think when the dust settles, people will see that Israel's democracy has been strengthened and not weakened. And I think people's fears that have been stoked and wept up, I think they'll subside and they'll see that Israel is just as democratic as it was before and even more democratic.
If Israel's Supreme Court strikes down your legislation, will you abide by their ruling?
I think we have to follow two rules. One is Israeli governments abide by the decisions of the Supreme Court. And at the same time, the Supreme Court respects the basic laws, which are the closest thing we have to a constitution. I think we should keep both principles, and I hope we do.
So you are committing, if the Supreme Court strikes down this legislation, you will abide by that ruling?
Remember what I said. I hope that they don't strike down, because I think we should abide by both rules. And it's a peculiar thing. It would be, in American terms, as though the Supreme Court that is charged with keeping the Constitution would nullify a constitutional amendment as unconstitutional. So it sort of turns on itself, and it doesn't make sense. I hope it doesn't happen.
Prime Minister, with respect, to change the American Constitution, it has to be done by consensus. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states. This legislation was not passed by consensus, a simple majority.
But the Supreme Court in Israel itself said that the basic laws that are passed by a supermajority in the Knesset, or not an incidental majority in the Knesset, is the basis of the Constitution. They call it a Constitution. So every country has its own, quote, Constitution, and by the Supreme Court's own definition, this basic law that they're now dealing with is part of our Constitution.
The Israeli military said to me, if reservists do not show up for reserve duty in the long term, there will be damage to the military's readiness. What do you say to Israelis who are worried that the way you've passed this legislation is so divisive, it may actually impact national security?
Well, first of all, it wasn't divisive. I mean, I waited for 7 months, as you yourself say, 7 months, to have basically an agreement on a relatively minor part of the reform that we originally put in. And we waited for some buy-in from the other side of the aisle in our parliament, in our Knesset. And finally, when nothing came, they refused to do anything, even the slightest agreement. We passed this thing. That's not doing, that's not rushing ahead with the reforms. It's seeking consensus, which I still seek now. As far as reservists are concerned, look, I think it's unfortunate that you've had reservists being lined up for something that involves a political debate. In America, I think the reservists account for about 1% of the population. In Israel, about half our people. We're a citizens' army, so half our people in the army. You can always mobilize a few thousand people for this or that argument. As it turns out, close to 100,000 reservists signed a petition supporting or refusing to have the position that these few put forward. I just think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to rope in people into a political debate. I think it politicizes the military. I think most people understand that. Most people are opposed to it. And I certainly don't. I think it was important to pass this particular clause that we did in order to make clear that the government does not abide by the dictates of former generals or people in the military or in the military reserves. Because once Israel goes down that path, and former generals can tell you, listen, if you pass this legislation, or if you don't do as we say, we're going to incite military disobedience, then Israel stops being a democracy. That's a real threat to democracy, and I think we can't accept it.
You've said that President Biden invited you specifically to the White House at this meeting later in the year. The White House is saying they still haven't decided where and when you're going to meet. What's going on with that discrepancy, and do you feel that the administration is keeping you at arm's length?
Well, I'm not going to get into the discussion that I had with President Biden, but I can tell you that I stand by what I said. But I think, look, I think Our relationship has its ups and downs, it has its differences, but basically it has its ups. And the best adducement to that fact is what the administration itself says. It says that our relations, the alliance has never been stronger. Our military and intelligence cooperation has never been stronger. It's true. Yeah, we can have our differences. President thought that we should have try to achieve these reforms by consensus. Happy to agree with him. I've tried, and I'm still trying. But I think ultimately it's a decision that is made, as in any sovereign democracy, by the elected officials of Israel, and that's what we're doing.
The president has expressed concern not just about these judicial changes, but also about the composition of your government. Your national security minister has convictions for inciting racism, for supporting a terrorist organization. Your finance minister once suggested wiping a Palestinian village off the map. He suggested segregated maternity wards to separate Jews and Arabs. When the president says you have brought extremists into the cabinet, is he wrong?
I think a lot of these statements have been walked away by these people since then. They're assuming government, they're assuming responsibility, they're changing their tune, and more importantly, it's not what they say, it's what we do. And what we do is to follow the responsible and tested policies that I've put forward. For example, recently in our security cabinet, I passed a decision that we will work to prevent the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. That wasn't too popular on my right. And so we had a vote. And 8 out of 10 security cabinet members voted for, 1 voted against, and 1 abstained. At the end, we made the decisions. It's the actions that count. And the words, well, I don't control the words, I control the deeds, but the words are changing as we go along, too.
But when President Biden says just 3 weeks ago that Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich are extremists, is he wrong?
Look, I can quote to you, going back to 20 and some years and more, every time that a center-right and right government is elected, it's the most extremist government in Israel's history. You can Google this. You'll find it. I don't want to say it's interesting, if not amusing. But I think what is important is what is the policy. And my policy is neither extremist nor foolhardy. It's careful, and it's responsible, and it's also firm, because I stand on what matters to Israel's security, but I think I'm perfectly realistic and pragmatic in the crucial issues of statehood.
How optimistic are you that there could be a peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia during President Biden's current term? And are you prepared to bless Saudi Arabia getting civilian nuclear power? Are you prepared to make concessions to the Palestinians as part of an agreement?
I think that if we achieve normalization and peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, this will be a pivot of history. I think it will be a quantum leap after the quantum leap we already made with the Abraham Accords, in which I signed 4 historic peace deals with Arab states, breaking this stranglehold that you have to wait to get peace with the Palestinians or you'll never get peace with the Arab world. Believe me, I had to crack that one. People said it couldn't be done. It was done. We did it. Now we have an opportunity to perhaps begin to end the Arab-Israeli conflict with peace with Saudi Arabia, open up to a peace between the Jewish people and the Muslim world. So I think it's a huge thing. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the negotiations of how to achieve it. If it was that easy, it would have been done. But I appreciate the fact that the administration is putting time and effort in this, as am I. And it's really, of course, up to Saudi Arabia and all of us to see if we can come to a middle ground. As far as what to do with the Palestinians, I'll tell you what my position has been. I always said that with the Palestinians, they should have all the powers to govern themselves, or rather, all the ability to govern themselves, and none of the powers to threaten Israel. And that hasn't changed. That's my view, and I'll do whatever I can. I'll never compromise Israel's security.
A number of human rights organizations, both American and Israeli, and a growing number of Democratic members of Congress say that the situation in the West Bank, where the Palestinians live with varying degrees of autonomy depending on where they live, but ultimately live under Israeli control, without a vote in Israel's government, they say that situation is apartheid. What do you say to that?
I think it's hogwash. I mean, the whole idea of ethnic cleansing is what they're talking about. We should get rid of the Jews because otherwise we can't have peace. We have to uproot Jews. That's like saying to me that the million and more Israeli Arabs, Israeli citizens who are Arabs, should be kicked out because we can't have peace unless we have a cleansed state. No, we are going to have to live together in creative arrangements. But I think the important thing to understand is the arrangement. Why do the vast majority of Israelis, by the way, across the political spectrum, do not want to Israel simply walk out from Judea Samaria, the so-called West Bank? Because we've tried it. We went out from Lebanon unilaterally and we got Hamas, rather Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy, to fire thousands of rockets from the places we vacated. We walked out of Gaza and we got Hamas, another Iranian proxy, that fired thousands of rockets from the areas we vacated. The territories that we're talking about are right here. They're about a kilometer from here, from this window, outside this window. So I think that we have to recognize that any peace arrangement would have Israel responsible for security because this is a tiny area. And if does that mean less than full sovereign powers? The answer is yes, it does mean that. But if you go across the political spectrum in Israel, an enormous number really think that. That issue has been settled because we've seen what happens. If we just give that sovereign power of security to the Palestinians right next to us, that means Iran controls that territory, subjugates them, and threatens our very existence.
And can you sustain support in the United States under the current situation with growing numbers of members of Congress saying this is apartheid?
Well, it's not apartheid. It's the Palestinians can vote for their own people. They can vote for their own parliament. They have their own flag, their own anthem, their own administration. The one thing they shouldn't have control over is security, because security means that they'll fall prey to terrorism and will fall prey to Iran's terrorist proxies. I think that's very different. As I said, the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, none of the powers to threaten us. That's the realistic solution, which overwhelmingly all Israelis, including liberal Israelis, support. You know who doesn't support it? People who shut their eyes to reality, and you're not going to find many. Even in Tel Aviv, where you sit, you're going to find most people agreeing with what I said.
You've said that negotiations with Iran need to be underpinned by a credible military threat. President Biden has said he is prepared to use force to stop Iran getting a weapon. Do you believe that threat is credible? Do you believe he would order a strike?
Well, look, I'm the Prime Minister of Israel, of the one and only Jewish state. And it's my responsibility to make sure that regardless of what our great ally, the United States, says, that Israel has to have the powers to defend itself by itself against any threat, and especially against Iran that threatens to annihilate us with nuclear weapons.